Welcome back to Indus Special. India began voting on April 11th in a 7-phase polling exercise to vote in the next government. Casting the ballot is considered a baseline for democratic expression and determines an orderly transition from one set of people's representatives to another. But it is just that, the baseline. It does not, in and of itself, mean that a country is democratic in the sense of being liberal and inclusive. The Indian elections have always been an exercise in majoritarian consensus. Since the coming to power of Prime Minister Narendra Modi in 2014, that majoritarian consensus has become violent, repressive, and coercive, excluding non-Hindu minority groups, including Muslims, who form the largest minority in India. There's an overall problem, but the microcosm of everything that is wrong about India's democracy is the disputed state of Jammu and Kashmir. Since 2014, the occupied state has seen a rising levels of state violence and the fight back by the occupied population. Yesterday, the voter turnout in Srinagar was 14% and 7% in the city. What exactly do elections mean for an occupied population? To discuss this, we have with us Muzzammil Ayyub Thakur, a Kashmiri activist based in London, and Gowhar Geelani, who's a journalist and joins me from Srinagar. Gowhar Geelani, since you were on the ground, tell us what happened yesterday. There was, of course, I have a list which tells me that towards south on the Jammu side, the turnout was obviously much more, but in the north, in the valley, it was low.
Well, Mr. Ejaz Haidar, in Srinagar parliamentary constituency, which basically comprises 3 districts, that is the summer capital Srinagar and central Kashmir's district of Budgam, and also Ganderbal, which basically has 15 assembly segments. And in those areas, the lowest turnout was witnessed in the summer capital Srinagar, which was 7.69. And overall, in all these 3 districts, the turnout was below 15%. And this despite the fact that all the Hurriyat leadership is either behind the bars or placed under house arrest or facing NIA summons. And the banning of 2 organizations, Jamaat Islami, and arrest of its over 400 sympathizers and members. And also, the kind of crackdown and militarization that is in Kashmir. And despite that, this militaristic and muscular policy, the turnout has been 7.67% in Srinagar, which is again a stark reminder how bad things are in Kashmir and how, Mr. Narendra Modi's policies, the muscular policy has actually failed on the ground. And people, I traveled to, central Kashmir yesterday, and also I was in Srinagar. There are 90 polling booths in this Srinagar Budgam parliamentary constituency where 0%, not a single vote was cast. And I traveled to the downtown of Srinagar yesterday around afternoon, around Zohar prayers, and there was like 2 polling stations where only 1 vote had been cast at 7:29 a.m. And then I traveled to, Budgam, which is a Shia-dominated region. There too, the polling percentage did not go beyond 20%. And it is normally considered to be a stronghold of one particular party. So there has been, the boycott call. Even the Hurriyat and the JKLF did not get a level playing field to reach out to the masses with their boycott campaign. But the people themselves chose to boycott the elections. And this has been a massive, massive victory for the sentiment on the ground, for resolution, and a massive, massive failure for the Modi's muscular and militaristic policy in Kashmir.
Absolutely. By the way, it's lovely to hear the azan in the background. Since it's an occupied territory and we know what happens with the Muslims there, nonetheless, it was great to hear the azan. Muzzammil, I want to just go to the conceptual part of it, to which I sort of indicated in my introduction about democracy and the electoral exercise as just a baseline, which in and of itself does not mean that a state or a country is also democratic in the sense of being inclusive and liberal, where there is constitutionalism. I was talking yesterday to Professor Ashok Swain, who teaches in Sweden, and he said to me that if the BJP is returned to power, there are two possibilities. One is that they will try to change the nature of the constitution, because that is a hurdle, because at least in theory, it's a secular constitution. And then he said that were that to happen, there's a possibility of a pushback, and we could see, what he described as almost a state of civil war. The world looks at India as the most populous democracy, as the beacon of democracy in the developing world, where there have been other states that have not been able to bring in democracy and all of that. So this charade of democracy, how do you look at it? I mean, what's the narrative here?
I think ultimately we've seen that India's attempt at democracy is the only way they actually promote democracy is through the RSS and the BJP. That is their beacon. That is their representation of what democracy is in the rest of India. When it comes to Kashmir, I think in terms of voter turnout, let's switch the game a little bit. Let's change the narrative and talk about the number of the boycott numbers instead. I mean, it's fine that we say it's 2% and 7% came to the votes, but ultimately, when we look at the reverse, it's 93% of people boycotted the elections. That is in itself a referendum. 93% did not choose to go through the constitutional parameters of India or what they perceive are democratic values inside Kashmir. 93% on average have boycotted the polls. That referendum in itself means that we reject the Indian constitution, we reject the Indian narrative, we reject the BJP, most importantly, we reject Narendra Modi. When it comes to internationalization of what India is, especially in its democratic values, I think we've seen, especially in the last couple of months, with the illegal airstrike they committed in Pakistan and the gamesmanship, the captaincy of Imran Khan when he returned the Air Force pilot, that is democratic values. If anybody is a beacon of hope in the subcontinent at the moment, it has to be Pakistan. India cannot be considered a beacon of hope. It cannot be considered a rising or shining power of democratic values in the subcontinent, especially when you see the beef, the repercussions of people eating beef or even transporting beef, or even the shak, the theory that somebody might be eating beef, that they lynch them, being considered a rape capital. And I think it's about time that the world remembers and they consider that India is not some kind of nostalgic tourism destination. It is the hub of radical right-wing, mercilessly killing the minorities, not just in Kashmir, but also the rest of India.
Absolutely. Muzzammil, but here's the thing. While since 2014, this has become very overt, and there's also no pretense now. But even under the Congress governments, there's been a lot of talk about secularism and the rest of it. But when it came to occupied Kashmir, the essence deep down has always been the same. It's been a thin veneer. You scratch it, and down below, you find the same kind of Hindu Rashtra, real estate, the civilizing project of secularism, of liberalism, and this is the liberalism which ultimately, in trying to, it's that old Kipling thing, the savage wars of peace kind of a thing, where the civilizing influence is going to the uncouth brutes of Kashmir need to be civilized and molded according to the secular Indian constitution. So I think when we look at the narrative, we also have to perhaps understand, as I do being a Kashmiri, and I declare it very openly, the fact is that the Congress hasn't really been, it has been more subtle, but it has been the same.
Absolutely. There is no real difference when it comes to Kashmir. Within India, they may preach different morals and different values, but ultimately, when it comes to core issues, for example, the caste system, for example, the so-called integrity of India in respect to Kashmir. The Congress and the BJP are exactly the same. It doesn't matter which power, which organization, which government is formed. The core policy on Kashmir will never ever change. As they say, a leopard never changes its spots, and the Prime Ministership of India is never going to change, regardless of who the party is, regardless of whether it's going to be Congress or BJP or even Aam Aadmi Party. We have Kejriwal, who is in Delhi, who is supported by the young working class, the slightly leftist. But even those people still have the same policy on Kashmir, that these people need to be de-radicalized, as if the Kashmir has a tendency to be radical, overtly against India unnecessarily, as if it is some kind of ingrained, I don't want to use the word, but brainwashing, as if Pakistan is somehow on the ground brainwashing the people of Kashmir. Pakistan are thousands of miles away. It is the Indian army that is inside Kashmir, in the villages, in the towns, raping civilians, killing people mercilessly, using bullets and pellets, and they call us uncivilized. I'm glad that you used the term from Rudyard Kipling about the savages. I mean, when we talk about savages, can we remember just for a moment that we have nearly 1 million military personnel inside Kashmir, occupying territories, occupying people's homes, occupying the hospitals even. The polling booths are not democratic the way that they're run. You have military personnel, people are voting on gunpoint. Not that I approve of the system of governance inside Kashmir anyway, but even then, if people want to vote, then it has to be under the barrel of the gun. Civilization as it is completely devoid in India, but when it translates to Kashmir, the way that they have portrayed us in the rest of the world is nonsensical. But the most important thing that I think is that the so-called liberals and the academics that claim to be sympathizers of Kashmir, within a particular framework, they are happy to talk about Kashmir. But beyond that, it is non-existent. I want to give you a quick example of Barkat Dutt. Just a couple of days ago, she was infamous for being a so-called champion of Kashmir. She will talk about women's rights, but she will not talk about the rapes that were caused or committed by the Indian army. She won't talk about the human shields. She won't talk about the illegal laws, the draconian laws, or for that matter, the Geneva Convention. There's something that she mentioned on her Twitter when the Indian Air Force pilot was captured. But when it comes to Kashmir, no, we have to stay within the policy of the Indian government. Kashmir is an integral part. Nonsense.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Gowhar Geelani, Muzzammil Ayyub Thakur. This was about India's democracy, the illiberal democracy that is grounded in, as I said, not just majoritarian consensus, but majoritarian coercion, especially in relation to the minorities and specifically in relation to the largest minority, which is the Indian Muslims on the one hand in Indian mainland, and the Kashmiris who are not Indian Muslims because they live in a disputed state. This is all for this week from India Special. We shall see you next week. Until then, it's goodbye.